Hi, this is Anthony. Welcome back to my show. I want to jump right into the topics because it's going to probably be a lengthy video, but I wanted first to say how humbled I am with everyone's support, subscribing to my channel, and commenting. I ask everyone to comment, even if you disagree with me, and I really mean it. I think that all people who disagree with me are being sincere in their disagreement. And while a few of them I think are just put off by what they perceive as the tone of my voice or arrogance, most people who disagree with me sincerely see the facts and situation differently than I do. Of course, my issue with them is that they may not have looked at all the facts before making up their mind, and some of these concepts are either very complicated, if you have no background in them, such as the workings of a nonprofit board, or they're very gray and murky and open to interpretations, such as what truly triggers a violation of a morals clause. Anyway, let's jump right into it today. I have two topics that I want to talk about because they keep on getting brought up, and it's not the first time that I've discussed some of them, but not everyone sees all of my videos. So the two topics or concepts that we're going to talk about today is optics, that is the optics of having married couples on the board of the Aftermath Foundation, and the other topic will be the concept of victimhood. So lots of comments about whether there should be married couples on the board and did that play any part in Aaron's removal. Now, if you haven't watched all of Aaron's interview on Down the Rabbit Hole, I encourage you to watch it. It's over 2 hours long, and it could be a little frustrating to watch here and there, but I think he does an honest job at providing most of the information that needs to be heard. It's clear that he's still bitter about the situation, although I think from his other videos he's also mentally moved on and feels liberated for not being under the microscope of the other board members, and also that he no longer needs to live any type of lie concerning his married life, and he's publicly stated that he and his wife are now going to get a divorce. Anyway, the reason that I bring all of this up is he clearly stated that he had no problem with married couples on the board. So, that really should settle the matter for everybody that strongly supports Aaron and is upset with the board. You can be upset with the board decision, but I would argue don't worry about married couples on the board. These people are mentally strong individuals that can make up their own mind. They are not going to be influenced by their spouses to make a decision that they wouldn't otherwise make. As I pointed out in the virtual meeting where Aaron was voted off, you had 3 couples show up. Ray Jeffrey, who is the lawyer and a member of the board, didn't show up. Aaron said that they waited awkwardly for 10 minutes to see if he was going to show up. He didn't show up, and then they voted Aaron off. Presumably it's 6-1. Now, a lot of people believe that there shouldn't be married couples on the board. So let's say that they changed the policy already so that the married couples could not serve on the board concurrently, and each of the men in the married couples stepped off the board. So at the time of the vote, the board consisted of Claire, Christy, Amy, Ray, and Aaron. Again, if the vote was held when it was and Ray didn't show up, the vote would be 3-1 to remove Aaron. I've had people try to argue with me on the math on that. If you don't get it, listen to it again. I've had people argue, well, if they would have removed the man, then they would have looked for other board members, and those board members might not have supported Aaron. Well, yes, if that happened, but it didn't. So at this point, we can't use that line of reasoning. Aaron many times has publicly stated that it was he and Luis Garcia who came up with the Aftermath Foundation, and he invited the other people on. That may be kind of true, but it seems like when they actually incorporated, the original founding members included the Headleys and Mike Rinder and his wife. And it may have included Ray Jeffrey at the time. And, of course, Aaron and Luis. Again, Aaron didn't have a problem with the concept of couples being on the board and has not argued that it was the couples that got him removed. Obviously, the couples voted against him, but it wasn't only because they were, or at all because they were couples. Many people with no evidence think that this is some type of power grab, that other board members, in particular Mike Rinder, were jealous of Aaron's success. I would say that this is clearly, to me, not the case. There is no power to be had. This is a nonprofit board. All the money that they get goes to helping people or things associated with that. I've looked at some of their finances online that you can find if you research it. It lists detailed things like postage and stuff like that. The board members are not getting any money. They're not paid. being on a board takes time and it creates headaches. I've had headaches on boards that I've chaired because of the antics of some of the board members. It can be a thankless job. I could understand that if this was a for-profit business where there was money involved getting rid of Aaron, that would result in more money for the other business owners. That's one thing, but this is not the case. This is not the Rinders and the Headleys sitting around thinking, hey, let's get rid of Aaron so that we get more power. There's no more power to be had. And as I argue, they're smart enough to know that if they got rid of Aaron, which I believe they felt they had no choice, that they would understand that there would be a lot of backlash because there's a lot of supporters of Aaron. Aaron has the most subscribers, so he's going to have the most supporters. They're smart enough to know how the social media world works. They know if there's a rift in the Aftermath Foundation, lots of people are going to unsubscribe from their channels. They know that people are likely going to stop donating to the Aftermath Foundation. But they did what they did because they believed that it was the right thing, not the popular thing. And again, I know that people think that I'm against Aaron. Not at all. I still watch his videos. They're usually the first ones that I look at when I sit down at my computer after I've checked the stats on my own videos. I encourage you to continue supporting Aaron, and quite frankly, I encourage you to continue supporting the other people. I think that they provide great information and are worthy of people's support, but you don't have to. Now, let's get on to the optics. Is it illegal or unethical or immoral for married couples to be on the board? No, it's really not. Most votes in most organizations are unanimous because they discuss the topics before the vote's held, and if anybody has any problem with it, they usually work it out so that when they actually go to vote, the motion that they vote on is one that everyone is satisfied with. Now, obviously, that's most of what happens on a board. On occasion, you have something controversial or the removal of a board member that's not necessarily how the vote goes, where it's unanimous. But if there's no prohibition in the bylaws and there's no prohibition by federal or state regulations, then it's legal to have married couples on the board, just as the Aftermath Foundation has. But I agree that to many people it looks bad. I think that they are making judgments based on very little actual evidence, but still a lot of people do that, and so to them the optics look bad. I've had some people write to me and say they don't have any problem with married couples being on the board, and I'm sure that there's a lot of people who hold that opinion that haven't written, but it's by far the vast majority of the people who don't think that it should be the case. Even though in a legal sense they're wrong, it's still the public perception, and many people believe that perception is reality. I'll get to that in a minute, but in my opinion, should the board have married couples on it? As I've said in a number of my videos, it would be good for the board to revise their bylaws and have a prohibition against closely related board members serving concurrently. And closely related is generally a concept that is adopted by the IRS and government agencies that would include spouses or mother and daughter or sister and brother. And I think that it would be good also for them to, on the Aftermath Foundation, and for every board, to have set terms of service and term limits. What do I mean? An example would be each member has a term of 3 years, and you could be re-elected for a second 3-year term. But after those 6 years of continuous service, you would need to sit off the board for at least a year before being voted back on to a new term. And again, if you have a prohibition against related people, in particular spouses, from serving at the same time, you would need to take that into account. I think that that would be a right step for the Aftermath Foundation, as well as any organization, in my mind, for one that pays attention to situations like this to adopt. Not just to hear or potentially salacious information about what happened in LA, but learn from other people's mistakes so that you don't make them. That's the whole reason that we're looking at these things, to try to learn from the mistakes of other people, Aaron as well as the board. And here I'm talking about if you're on a board of directors of any type of organization and you haven't yet had a problem like this, get together and say, look, we have a bunch of holes in our bylaws that don't address certain things that could come up. Let's do some research, find some best practices, and implement them so that we don't face issues and backlash like the Aftermath Foundation has. Okay, before I finish up on the topic of optics, this is going to get a little philosophical for a bit. I don't want to lose people though, but what do we really mean by optics? It literally means how we see things. But often, how we see things isn't simply what our eyes perceive, but how we quickly judge something that we see. And quite frankly, we're prejudging a situation before we have complete information. And the problem with almost everything in the world is we realistically almost never have complete information, but often we can have enough information to make an informed decision if we just wait. If we wait until we actually have all the information. But many people don't wait. They prejudge and make up their minds on something that they have not gotten all the facts on. And isn't prejudge the root of prejudice? And I think everybody agrees that being prejudiced is wrong, even though they are inadvertently falling into that trap without realizing it sometimes. Let's give an example. We're going to make up a world, not unlike our own, but where everybody is either purple or green. And don't try to read anything into those random choices of colors. Okay. And you're a security guard, and your skin color is purple. And you work at a Target store, and you have a problem with shoplifting. And sure, some of the people who shoplift are purple, but your experience working there for 10 years is the vast majority of shoplifters that you've caught have been green. And one day while you're on duty, hiding amongst the aisles, a young green male comes in. You keep an eye on him. He's wearing his hat crooked and his clothes are baggy and they're kind of sagging down on his hips. He's walking up and down the aisle, looking around, kind of suspicious. He picks up a small item, looks at it, puts it down, walks a few feet down, picks up another item, looks at it, looks at the price tag, puts it down, walks back over to the first item, picks it up, sets it down again. He looks at the price tag on the shelf, looks around to see if there's any other ones, looks at the camera because he knows he's probably being watched, spends some more time looking at things on the shelf, and then finally walks over and picks up the second item that he's looked at, and then he starts walking away. It's a small item that's in his hand, and if you hadn't seen him pick it up, it's so small that you wouldn't know that it was in his hand. He's walking towards the door, and you know he's going to walk out without paying. Oh, wait, he's over in line now to pay. And you see that he pays with a couple crumpled ones and some quarters and some nickels, and then he leaves. So he wasn't a shoplifter. He was an honest but fairly poor young man who had been mowing some neighbors' lawns and returning cans for deposits so that he could have some money to buy one or two items that he'd wanted. And he, quite frankly, is, like me, somebody who spends probably too much time deciding which is the best item of two inexpensive items at the store that one can buy so that I don't have buyer's remorse. Now, with 10 years of experience as a security guard, shown that you were generally right when you identify shoplifters? Sure. Optics could be 100% correct, but not always, and you can't prejudge somebody until they've walked out the door without paying. But you can't prejudge people on a board thinking that they will vote contrary to how they would otherwise, simply because another member of the board is tied to them by close blood relations or by domestic partnership. And again, I'm not directing this towards any particular person who's written about this, because many people have written to me about this, and I believe that they're all sincere. But just because you think the optics of married couples on the board is bad, ask yourself, are the optics of you thinking that without any experience of being a board member, not in itself some bad optics, which I argue is another less controversial word for prejudice. And to wrap up on this one, if there were no married couples at the time of the divorce, people would still be upset with the board members, because I get just as many arguments that they're resorting back to their old Scientology ways. So then the optics of having former Scientologists on the board to help former Scientologists looks bad. But who better knows the problems that former Scientologists have in leaving Scientology and getting reestablished in society than former Scientologists? And quite frankly, I'm sure that the Aftermath Foundation would love to have some very qualified, competent, non-ex-Scientologists to join their board. But again, as many people have pointed out, who wants to join a board of the Aftermath Foundation and be fair gamed by Scientology? Not a lot of people, probably. I think that's all that I'll say on the subject of optics. If after listening to what I say you still disagree with me, I doubt that we'll ever come to an agreement. But again, I argue that it would be best for the organization to exclude married couples. Not because it's legally, morally, or ethically wrong to have them. It's just another public relations issue that they don't need to have to worry about. Let's look at the topic of victimhood for a moment. If you think optics is kind of a controversial topic, victimhood is even much more so. Throughout much history, victims of all types have often been ignored by the police, by society, by the authorities, and I think that at least in the United States we're making some good progress towards accepting the stories of victims, or at least listening to their sides before making a decision. But just like there's usually two sides to a story, sometimes there's more than one victim in an altercation between two people. But I think for a moment, ignoring the Aftermath Foundation situation, I'm going to say something which some people are going to find controversial. I think that for some people, especially groups of people in society, in the world, there has been created a cult of victimhood. And before you jump to conclusions, hear me out. I think that some people use victimhood to justify the bad outcomes of their poor decisions, and for continuing to make poor decisions after that. But I think every individual needs to realize that there's a sword hanging above their head somewhere, either directly over their head or pretty close, and that sword is marked tough love. And sometimes, I think, the sword falls and maybe whacks them on the head, hurts them a little bit, but it doesn't kill them, and they still don't learn the lesson. Okay, let's look at Aaron, since that's why we're here. In his Down the Rabbit Hole video, he laid out all of his bad behavior, some of which he's mentioned before, some of which he's not mentioned in anything that I've seen at least. He gets in a rowdy altercation at a bar during Mardi Gras, or perhaps it shouldn't be termed an altercation. He gets rowdy at a bar during Mardi Gras. The police are called. He later finds out that he was trespassed, but there's no real victim here. But it may show a trend of behavior. Next incident, at a bar where he claims that he was the victim, and he points out that he's the one that called the police on the other person, not the other way around. And I think that if you've heard Aaron talk about the situation, which I have a couple occasions, and I've rewatched the most recent one, you might think, yeah, he was the victim. The boyfriend of the girl came up and punched Aaron and knocked him off his bar stool. Now, do I think that there was any good reason, any justification for the guy to get up and knock Aaron off the bar stool? No, not really. Violence is not the answer. People shouldn't be doing that. But we have to remember that the woman in question knew Aaron to a degree, and it turns out later on that she believed that Aaron had been stalking her a year or so before. Now, if you listen to Aaron's explanation, I hope you agree with me that it was an innocent miscommunication, and Aaron in no way was stalking the woman. But it's pretty clear after hearing the whole story that that was at least partially in her mind. And then, as Aaron pointed out, he and a guy sitting next to him that he didn't know started talking loudly, because he was drunk, about the woman and how they thought she would perform in bed. Evidently, they were loud enough that the woman's boyfriend heard, and that's when he came down and punched Aaron out. So, was Aaron the victim of the boyfriend's violence? Sure. Was the woman first a victim of what many people could interpret as some type of sexual harassment by a loud, drunk man talking about her in a sexual way in a bar? I think one could argue that she, at least in her mind, and quite frankly in my mind too, was a victim of some type of sexual harassment or verbal harassment. And again, in her mind, she is likely to have believed that she was a victim of him stalking her a year or so before, which I don't believe was actually the case. But again, she misinterpreted what had been said to her by Aaron on social media, and so could have seen herself as a victim. I think that that's understandable. So in this situation, sure, Aaron was a victim of getting punched by the girl's boyfriend, but was the girl first a victim of one or more instances of bad behavior by Aaron? I think that you can say yes. And again, the second incident is one that involved Aaron drinking a lot. And Aaron has pointed out he doesn't always get into trouble when he's drinking, but when he does get in trouble, it's usually when he's been drinking. Does Aaron have a drinking problem? I'm not qualified to make a decision, and my guess is probably he doesn't have a drinking problem, but on occasion when he's drinking, problems crop up. In the Down the Rabbit Hole video, he mentioned that he had tried the white powder in Florida, didn't like it, and then he went on a boys' trip to Colombia where he indicated that they did at least two bad type of things, including him trying the white powder, which is famous as a Colombian agricultural product, and again, he didn't like it. And it sounds like he's not going to try it again, and I hope that he doesn't. And I believe him when he says that he won't. But is this good behavior on the part of a father who loves his daughters? I understand that he and his wife were, for all intents and purposes, separated, and it sounds like he could do what he wanted with her permission, as far as dating other women. I pass no moral judgment over that, but he's putting himself in an extremely risky situation. Trying the white powder anywhere is dangerous. It could have fentanyl in it. You could literally die the first time you try it if it's contaminated. And the first time was in Florida. The second time he went to Colombia. We all know that this is an extremely dangerous place. I would be reluctant to go there under any type of circumstances unless it was on some type of official business where I had American or Colombian officials protecting me. I looked up the crime stats for Colombia, and they are terrible. The United States Department of State warns people not to go to most places in Colombia at all and be cautious in the rest of the country. The Canadian Foreign Ministry has the same warnings. What if he was hanging out with Colombian girls, which it sounds like he probably was, and trying the white powder, which he said he did, and something happens? He has a reaction and ends up in the hospital. The police burst in and arrest them all. Narco-terrorists come in and kidnap them. Kidnapping is a problem in Colombia. I think I saw online at least 25 foreign tourists were killed in Colombia last year. Thank God nothing bad happened to Aaron, but he chose to put himself in a place with an increased risk to his life. And what would he say if something bad happened? I was a victim of corrupt cops who busted me. I was a victim of narco-terrorists who kidnapped me. Should somebody be able to go to another country like that and partake in those things and not have something bad happen to them? Sure, I don't want bad things to happen to anybody. But when you put yourself into a situation, any situation beyond the norm, where you greatly increase the risk to you, if something bad happens to you, are you truly only a victim, or are you somewhat responsible for your own victimhood? If you live in a low-crime area and you're walking down the street on a Sunday to go to church in a town that hasn't had a murder in a decade and hasn't had a kidnapping in over a century, and all of a sudden you get killed by a random stray bullet, are you a victim? Sure. There's nothing that a reasonable person could have done to avoid that other than staying at home their entire life, and that's just not realistic. But if you're out of the countryside and you see a fenced-off area, and you see a bull, or what you think might be a bull, and there's no sign that says you can't climb over the fence and go pet the animal, and you do, maybe it's just a steer and it'll be pleased if you pet it. Or maybe it's a bull and that red coat that you have on triggers it, and you get to go see Xenu sooner than you thought. So in that case, are you a victim? Well, you didn't do anything to the bull. He's the one that gored you. But the problem is you didn't use good judgment. Maybe you can't tell the difference between a docile steer and a bull, and you've reached through many fences and petted the forehead of a steer, and so you thought getting in the bull ring would be the same thing. Sure, you're now a victim, but you really set yourself up to be. Now, I know some people are going to think that I'm victim shaming. It's a very fine line. I think that a person of whatever gender identification they have should be able to have consensual, intimate relations with another person of whatever gender identification they may have, and for them to have a great time without anyone feeling like a victim afterwards. But it doesn't matter if you spent a great deal of your life in a cult. We've all seen TV shows and movies in real life, or people who interact with other people that they may know well, or they may not know at all, can still become victims of unwanted behavior. I've listened to a couple times of what Aaron has said about his experience in Los Angeles. Again, as I've said, I find him credible. And I, at this point, believe everything that he has said concerning that incident. Nothing that he said has made me question any of the veracity of what he said. I personally don't think that he left out any relevant information that would make me think otherwise. I think he was 100% the victim in that situation. I don't think that the woman in the situation was a victim at all. I do believe that she was mentally ill, and probably at least to a degree believes what she has said, but I think that her behavior, to the degree that she was mentally aware of it, was completely inappropriate. Again, that incident is different than the bar incident where you have two victims. I think in LA, Aaron was 100% the victim. But can he be the victim, but also 100% responsible for putting himself into what could have been a bad situation? I would argue yes. And I think that Aaron might even agree. But I'm not going to speak for him. Nobody put him there other than the woman encouraging him and his own libido. But I don't think that it was Osa, and Aaron agrees with me that it wasn't. This wasn't Mike Rinder trying to set him up. This wasn't the machinations of Mark Headley. This was Aaron wanting to have intimate relations with an attractive woman, and I don't blame him. That could happen to many men, but most men are not prominent anti-Scientologists who have Scientology agents, maybe keeping an eye on him. They're not people who at the time were officially married, although with the consent of their spouse for all intents and purposes separated, although the whole point was to keep it secret so not to embarrass his wife. And Aaron admitted that at least on the last of the 3 nights that he was with this woman, that there was alcohol and psychedelic mushrooms involved. Again, what we have to do, I believe, is keep in mind what is good judgment relative to victimhood. Very rarely is the introduction of alcohol something which leads to better decision making than otherwise. I can speak very little, really zero, on psychedelic mushrooms, other than what I've seen acquaintances go through when they've eaten them, and they do not necessarily contribute to better decision making. Aaron was keeping his separation from his wife secret from the general public to spare her any embarrassment. What would be the embarrassment to his wife if he was arrested and needed her to bail him out of a Los Angeles jail? If the woman would have called the cops, there is nearly 100% chance Aaron would have ended up in jail. He may eventually have been released without charges, and investigations may have showed that he was completely innocent of what this mentally ill woman had said, but the optics of that would have been terrible for Aaron and his family. Again, bad decisions. I know that a lot of people want to just look at Aaron as the victim here, and a victim in the incident, and a victim in the incident where he was at the bar, and as a victim of getting voted off the board. But from the perspective of the board members, and I think I can put myself in their mind because I've been on many boards in my area, as I've listed in my other videos, in the mind of board members, that they see a pattern of Aaron getting kicked out of a bar, getting in a fight at another bar, and then getting in a terrible, unfortunate incident that could have been even worse in Los Angeles. So from their perspective, seeing this escalating chain of poor choices and behavior, even if some of those are cases where Aaron is to a degree a victim of certain circumstances, it still doesn't look good. It likely violated existing bylaws as well as a new policy, which the board probably voted on even if Aaron did not vote on it. It seems like he finally has admitted that he told them he wasn't going to accept the new code of conduct, and that when it was actually sent to a vote, he did not vote on it, even though he was given the opportunity to via email. But because there was an existing morals clause in the bylaws, they were able to justify voting him off. I know people want to dispute and debate that, but it's too late, so let's not even dwell on it. Again, I know some of you think that I'm victim shaming. In my mind, I'm not. And I don't think that people should be looking at other cases where they don't have much information and blame the victims. And I think in some of these cases, Aaron was 100% the victim or was partially a victim. But he also put himself in each of those locations on his own accord and continued escalating poor behavior that led to some bad consequences and some incidences which fortunately did not lead to anything bad but could easily have, are the type of things that boards have to deal with. Plus, this crazy woman then contacted them and everyone in Aaron's social media about her perspective of the incident and sent them a video, which Aaron has stated, so I'm not making that up. He discussed that in the Down the Rabbit Hole video. And one last thing, when Aaron was talking about his drug use and detailing what he'd used and when and what he hadn't, he mentioned that he'd be willing to try LSD. Again, I'm not trying to play the morals cop here, but I don't know if Aaron really has learned the lessons that perhaps experimenting with mind-altering drugs might not be a good idea. The reason that certain drugs are illegal isn't just to keep people from having fun. There are health and safety issues associated with this activity. If Aaron were to obtain LSD, could he be sure that it's not contaminated by something? We have a terrible fentanyl problem nearby where I live. And even if he did get uncontaminated LSD, would he take it in a location and with people that would result in a healthy experience, or could things go south quickly? Honestly, as I think of this, I'm still kind of worried about Aaron. If he said he's learned the lessons and he's never going to touch alcohol and he's never going to touch any illicit substances or even legal mind-altering or body-altering substances other than what's prescribed by a doctor, then that's one thing. But it seems like he's not learned his lessons truly since he's willing to continue possibly using other types of drugs in the future. Now, I know that he has said that he's learned that since he's been removed from the board, but as a board director, if he was still on, I'd be concerned about that potential behavior also. This has gotten way longer than I intended, and I'm sure most people have stopped listening by now, but I think that what I've said has some relatively important stuff here. So I hope that you've been open-minded and you've listened to the concepts that I'm dealing with. In many cases, these are not clear-cut black and white concepts. There's a lot of gray, and that's what makes being on a board and being a board member making decisions is so tough. I'll end here. Let me know what you think. Hit the relevant buttons. Thank you so much. I appreciate it.